Welcome back with a smiling face. Important note before starting, if you are a fan of audio stories, then our Patreon account is the best platform for you. Join us on Patreon for the best audiobooks ever. Luna's Resurgence. Episode 7. Chapter 35 to 39. Lucinda POV. Lucinda knew she'd fallen asleep out in the living room, had taken a pillow out there on purpose, to sleep on her own and to make a point of how unhappy she was. Vaguely recalled Samantha covering her with a blanket and patting her on the head. Said good night. Had not encouraged her to go and get in the bed. Probably knew what was going on. She seemed to be trusted by Nick, if she was allowed to be in here and have access codes. Lucinda knew her eyes had opened briefly and fluttered closed a moment later. Waking up in the bed again. His body pressed up against hers, his arm was curled around her waist. At least she wasn't in some embarrassingly clingy position, like she had been the other day. Her being mad at him helped to solve that, it seemed. Morning. His deep voice came from behind her, soft and husky. "Get off me," she muttered. Lucinda heard him sigh, but he did let go of her and give her the space she'd demanded of him. Felt him roll over away from her. "I'll be off to training shortly." "You aren't allowed to join," he casually reminded her, like she needed it. "Go," she stated flatly and rolled onto her stomach, buried her face into her pillow. "I'll find something else to do," she thought to herself absently. "The lifeguard and gym trainer will both inform me if you go there to train yourself," he told her. He didn't seem angry with her. Probably still disappointed in her behavior from yesterday. If she was totally honest with herself, Lucinda knew, looking back on yesterday's training, she too was disappointed in herself. It wasn't like her ORKYRA to go around punishing innocent people the way she had yesterday. Other than that one she-wolf who definitely needed putting her in her place. The warrior and Brady were uncalled for. She'd been brutal with the both of them, when really all she had wanted to do was hurt Nick. "I'll apologize to Brady and that warrior," she mumbled. "A good start," he replied. She felt his lips press against her. "Should briefly please eat something today," he told her softly, and then he was out of the bed. The BD crawled right out over the top of her. She knew he was doing it on purpose. Probably thought her offer of an apology was her way of saying she wasn't mad anymore. She was still mad about what he'd done. But she didn't know, something felt different now. Inside of her, it was almost like she could still feel the twins. Her bond with them. Thought she was sure it had snapped completely. The pain of it breaking had been so terrible she'd passed out from it. But there it was still, she could swear, maybe not as strong but definitely still there. She heard him leave the room and sat up. It was only just on sunrise. Lucinda got out of the bed and opened up all curtains and pushed all the windows open and let the morning breeze in. It was a little nippy, but it would warm up as the day moved on. It was early spring. Cold mornings, warm afternoons and cool nights. She made coffee and eggs on toast and took herself out to the balcony to eat breakfast. She was really starving, probably would eat more afterwards. Sat staring out at nothing in particular, wondering as she did come springtime, if the lotus flowers back in her pack had started to bloom yet. It was always such a pretty sight. Springtime was when they started to grow and bloom, and in summer the whole water reserve would be filled with them. She missed them. Sitting watching at sunrise as they opened, or in the evenings to watch them close up. Wading through the water with her mother to pick them, especially when there was a special occasion, where lots of them had to be picked and put on display, each one getting a glass bowl of their own to float in on the tabletops. Her Luna ceremony would have seen a room full of them, just for her. Not that she'd gotten to have that. Lucinda glanced up at the lightning sky and brushed the tear that fell down her cheek away. She missed her home. A deep breath in and she pulled herself together. It was very unlikely anything like that happened around here. It would be nice. Her eyes moved to the koi fish in the large fountain and she wondered if Nick would be opposed to her putting in some. Probably. Now was not the time to ask, and she was certain he wasn't going to let her drive back to her home and collect the ones from there to bring here. Or as she would tell him to go to Half Moon Pack. She would never ask anyone to go there and get them for her. Not with Alpha Darwin roaming about, she'd only seen him once in 8 years, why he'd been there she had no idea, why he'd thought he could chase her out of her pack, was another curiosity. Lucinda sat with a foot dangling from the pod chair, her toes just touching the ground, pushing herself gently back and forth wondering what to do with herself today. That was today's concern. She was going to call home and speak to Gabby, wanted to make sure the twins were okay. Had been way too mad to do it yesterday, and too exhausted in the afternoon. She had pushed herself past her own limits yesterday. Kyra had been quiet all yesterday. Barely said a word to her at all. After she had attacked Nick, unhappy about her wanting to hurt their mate. But she had not stopped her either. Lucinda could feel that Kyra had been mad with him too, but had not wanted to actively hurt him, as Lucinda had. Lucinda knew that Kyra could force herself to the surface, and stop her from doing things. Perhaps she really did understand it. Her anger towards him, Kyra had been angry too, Lucinda had been able to feel it. It's why she'd not been able to calm down at all, they'd been feeding off of each other all morning. Even now she was still quiet, back there, but laying quietly in her mind, curled up and facing away from her. She would come back when she was ready, Lucinda guessed. It wasn't like she could run away, they were one and the same. What do you want to do today? She asked her wolf, but got no answer, not even a lift of her head, not a twitch of her tail. Nothing. There wasn't much she could do, with no training, no bow. He'd locked that away. No shifting unless he was with her. It didn't appear that Kyra was interested in shifting, or wandering about in wolf form either. What was there left that she could do to try and cheer Kyra up? Do you want to visit the creche? Lucinda asked, knowing it was her wolf's one true weak spot, felt Kyra's ears prick up and her head lift slightly. But then she huffed and laid it back down. Still mad at me, I see. Lucinda dressed in light pink shorts and a light blue t-shirt, brushed her hair and braided it down her back. Dropped her breakfast plates on the coffee table in the living area, so that Nick could see she had eaten something, grabbed an apple still a mite peckish and headed out of the suite, before he got back from training. Didn't particularly want another showdown with him. Or have him try to seduce her, like he'd been trying to, every day since she got here. It had not escaped her attention just how neat his suite was, nothing ever seemed to be out of place, she was not a neat freak like he was, liked tidy but didn't obsess over it. His suite didn't even really look lived in at all. It was more like a display room. Well, her style was a little more lax than his. She didn't mind leaving a few dishes in the sink, to be washed and put away later, or a wet towel dropped on the back of a chair here or there. He was going to have to deal with it. Though today she'd left he plates and coffee cup on purpose, so he wouldn't hunt her down to make sure she had eaten, and her gut was telling her, he was the type to do so. She was walking past the entryway to the gym, it was a no-go zone for her at the moment, his pack member would tell him if she went in there. A sigh escaped her, what a waste. Kyra's ears pricked up, at the sound of children laughing. I'm so getting in trouble, she thought as she took a step back, pushed through the door to the gym and found what looked like a mother and child play group. Kyra was up instantly in her mind, Lucinda smiled. Ha, got your attention now. She walked further into the room. Saw the trainer look right at her, she smiled and nodded to him. Do you mind if I just watch? She asked him. So he wouldn't contact Nick right this second. He shook his head after a moment's thought. Lucinda watched to see if her mind linked. Nick didn't appear to. She sat down and watched, as the children, maybe 3 to 4 years old, were playing and tumbling, with help from the trainer and their mothers. Couldn't help but smile as she watched. It was the beginning of their agility training, something they would all grow into and use, to become strong and sprightly, once they got their wolves. Lucinda recalled these classes, with Gabby and the twins. They were always fun to participate in. Had been before she'd gotten Kyra, wondered if Kyra would be interested in participating. She was currently sitting upright, watching with full interest the antics that were going on. Watching the mums interact with their young. Not something Kyra had ever done before. Not the playful kind. Not interested in anything but training and becoming stronger and faster. Happy to play with the twins though, so maybe it would be something. The class ended and some of the mums smiled at her. It seemed they knew who she was, or at least some of them did. Found the gym trainer standing in front of her. He was a tall, wiry lad about her age, she guessed, but that was often hard to tell. Most wolves stopped again around 25 to 30 and could look young and fit well into their first century of life. Hello, he directed down at her. Hi, I know I'm not supposed to be in here, she acknowledged. Well, Luna, that's not exactly true, you're not allowed to train. So sitting here, he shrugged. Not a problem, he chuckled. A little technicality. It was the first time in a very long time anyone had actually used her rank. Well, what can I do for you? She smiled up at him. I think it's more what I can do for you, he smiled right back at her. I've got a class of kindy kids coming in and I thought, seeing as you enjoyed watching, you might like to join in this time. I'd like that, she nodded. Felt Kyra wag her tail a little. Shoes off, he winked at her. They'll be here soon, why don't you help me set up? I'm Scott, by the way. Lucinda, she returned. She slipped off her joggers and socks and helped Scott set up, following his direction to set up 24 small cones, then a series of stepping stools, a tunnel and some limbo bars. There was a whole layout of yellow dots, which Scott explained to her that the littlens, as he called them, had to jump from one to the other. There would be a game of stuck in the mud, at the end, where he and she plus the 2 teachers coming, would get to chase them around and feint at them, allowing them to try and turn or dodge out of the way. All necessary skill-building techniques for later in life, she realized. Kyra was more than happy to assist, it seemed, which totally surprised Lucinda, as she pushed forward every now and then to growl playfully at the children. But she had always enjoyed chasing the twins around at Half Moon Pack. This was no different, it seemed. Jumping and pouncing at the children with a playful growl made them all squeal and laugh. They were not in the slightest bit afraid of her, the newcomer to their group. She noted Scott's wolf also played along as well, just like Kyra. These children had come in their school uniform and there was about 40 of them, 2 teachers as he'd said. Both teachers also were fully interactive and helping out. It was a great way to spend an hour of her time. Kyra was very happy, the teachers all thanked her for her time. There's one more class coming. Scott smiled at her. I'm in, she laughed at him. I haven't done this in a while, and Kyra, my wolf, is happy too, she told him. He nodded. The next group were bigger, 7 or 8, same age as the twins, she thought. They played leapfrog. Tunnel ball, where the tunnel was made of the other kids and the adults, each one taking their turn crawling through, pushing the ball in front of them. There was a game of tag and then Red Rover crossover. Another hour well spent. Luna, you can come and help anytime. Scott informed her. How often do you run the classes? Lucinda inquired. It was really fun and something she could do easily, and with not being allowed to train, why not? 5 days a week, 3 mornings and 2 afternoons. I'll get you the schedule. My mate Amy runs the afternoon classes and the swim school while I train. Lucinda smiled. It didn't surprise her that he and his mate worked together. Sometimes mates did not like being separated from each other. She accepted the schedule and wandered off out of the gym while looking it over. Only ran on school days, as did swim classes, allowing for families to spend weekends together, family bonding time. Well, why not? She and Kyra didn't have anything else to do with themselves, might as well, it was fun. It wasn't really training, or at least Scott hadn't reported her to Nick, not that she was aware of anyway. A job more like, than training. Kyra seemed happy with this, loved the little ones, though the first group had made her the happiest. She found a quiet corner in the library by a window and called Gabby to see how the twins were doing. Gabby picked up right away. Hey! How's it going? Excitement laced her words. Not good, to be honest, she sighed, and it wasn't, not really, but didn't want to upset Gabby and make her worry at this point. How are the girls? She asked, changing the subject. Good, at school right this minute. Yet I know, are they really okay? Lucinda wondered if the bond she'd felt snap had affected them at all. Had they felt it, had it caused them any pain? It did concern her. They are good. I promise. Why are you so worried? Is it because you've been initiated by Nick, into his pack now? Yes, she said, but did not go into the details. It would only make her mad again. She knew Alpha Corey and Luna Lindy would have felt the tether to her snap. It's just how it was. Though they were likely used to it due to loosing wolves at mating balls to other packs. Have you let him? No, not even close. Lucinda cut her off completely. They were not likely going to do that for a long while. Lucinda thought, knew Kyra was wanting her mate, but she herself had reservations, and after what he'd done, wasn't particularly interested in letting him anywhere near her. Marking and mating was off the table for her at this point. Needed way more time. Had only thought to officially reject him once and received a nasty snarl from her wolf, the instant she'd thought it, and so had pushed the thought away instantly. The girls didn't get hurt by it, did they? She changed the subject again. Finally asking the question nagging at her, weighing on her mind. Not that I am aware of. Both of them seemed a bit extra grumpy for an hour or so right around the time. Alpha Corey let us know you'd been initiated by Alpha Nick. What do you mean? Extra grumpy? She asked, bring the conversation back to the girls and ignoring Gabby's not so subtle way of trying to steer it back to Nick. Just that. Stomped around the suite and threw their toys at the walls, and myself and James for that matter, the two of them actually tipped over the coffee table, made a big mess. Completely in sync with each other, it was like really weird, like they could already talk to each other through the mind link and did everything the same together. I'm sorry. Lucinda bit her lip. They had felt it. It's fine, Lucinda, was what is supposed to happen, you know that. No, about their behavior, she sighed. Look, the girls, as you are aware, have tempers and are strong-willed. Nothing James and I can't handle. They calmed down and were fine about an hour later. Just started playing like nothing happened. A little odd, I admit. But they are good now. You're certain? Yes, honey, I'm certain. I'm guessing it hurt on your end. She had concern in Gabby's voice. She stated, held back the anger and refused to let herself cry, remembering the pain of what he'd done to her. Something must have passed down the line to Gabby. Come on, Lucinda, everything will be fine and you know it. Maybe was all she said and hung up a short while later. She sat and looked out the window for a long time. Would it be all right? She didn't know, they were two very different people. Her wolf hearing picked up the sound of two women talking. Do you think she has any idea that once he's got an heir he'll toss her aside? Kyra was up instantly. It was clear they were talking about her. No one in a pack talked about an heir with the exception of the alpha. I don't know, feel real sorry for her though. Those frost men, just take what they want and then move on. Pain seared her chest, she rubbed at it, trying to make it go away. Why would they say that? Yet, he's not exactly the settling down type. The other woman laughed softly. They were moving away. Nope, betted half the pack already I'm guessing. Never happy with just one woman, the woman's voice trailed off. Lucinda sat there shocked by this revelation. Betted half the pack. Not the settling down type. Toss her aside once he got an heir. Alarm bells were starting to go off inside her mind. Those clauses Lindy had put in. He wasn't allowed to ask for an heir. Once marked and mated, he had to stay with her for the rest of his natural life. If he did reject her against the mating alliance, what kind of man was he? Her heart was actually aching quite a bit, she realized. They might not currently be on the best of terms, but she was bonding to him, she'd felt it, sometimes had to look away from him to try and stop herself from feeling more towards him. Now this news, and it correlated with the clauses in her mating alliance. What had Luna Lindy and Alpha Corey done to her? All because she'd antagonized Alpha Darwin. They thought sending her here was better, safer. They'd told her, it didn't sound like it at all. Should have just let her have a piece of Darwin and let the chips fall where they lay. The ache was still there, perhaps he was just faking everything, to get what he wants from her. An heir to his pack. 36. Nick POV. Lucinda had still been angry with him this morning. He'd let go when she'd asked, not wanting to push it. He rolled onto his back but kept his eyes on her. He'd already pushed it by putting her in their bed. But one of the books Luna Lindy had given him to read, had explained to him, that the more time he spent with his mate, the stronger the bond would grow between the two of them. Even just sleeping next to each other would strengthen the bond. So he was trying it. Besides, he didn't want to sleep alone anymore. Though still angry with him, Lucinda had not snarled or growled at him when he'd kissed her shoulder this morning or climbed out of bed right over the top of her. He'd only done it to see what reaction he would get. No reaction at all. Just ignored him completely. Had to be better than an angry snarl that he'd gotten the day before. She was also willing to apologize to Brady and Sampson. He was pleased with that. Probably have to set it up, how she would want to do it. He would have to ask her. Brady he knew wasn't expecting one, but he was owed one. Sampson hadn't said anything at all, but would probably like an apology. Nick was not expecting her to apologize to Valerie. That she-wolf had intentionally sized up the Luna, challenging her. Lucinda had put her firmly in her place and in record time. Nick was curious what Lucinda had said to Valeria, might ask her yet. He wondered if he should be hauling Valerie into his office and have her explain her actions to him. He couldn't understand the woman's sudden need to antagonize her Luna. If she continued to keep up her behavior, she would not only have to explain to him, but he'd make her explain in front of Lucinda as well. So that there was no misunderstandings at all. No further need for her to behave that way. Coming back from training, he'd found her breakfast dishes on the coffee table. At least she had listened to him about eating, he was happy about that. She was not in the suite, but he'd not really expected her to be. There would be no playing with her this morning. Hopefully again soon. 2 days of nothing and he already missed taunting her playfully. It was almost 9, when Scott mind-linked him from the gym, to tell him the Luna was not only in the gym but had been helping him with the Little Ends class. She appeared to be having fun playing with them. Thought Nick might want to come see the Luna in action for himself. There was one class left to run this morning and his Luna was going to help with it too. Nick liked the way the man called her the Luna, all the time. Nick had been very surprised by Mind Link. The minute Scott had linked him he'd thought she had gone and disobeyed him again, gone to the gym to train, but apparently not. He snagged Jeremy on the way out of his office and they both headed off towards the gym. The two of them stood just inside the door and watched her. Nick could only smile, as he saw her chase the pups around, her hands up like human claws. She would lunge at them intentionally coming up short he noted. Give a playful little growl and they'd turn and run away from her squealing and laughing. He watched her pounce and miss, let them pounce on her. A couple of times she was grabbed on the leg and the pups would smile right up at her. I got you, they would yell all excitedly. You're just too fast. She'd playfully tickle them and then they would run off. Rip was all attention as well. They could both see that Kyra was right there, the green tinge in Lucinda's honey brown eyes was unmistakable. They were smiling and laughing the whole time. Looked very happy. It was really nice to see. Nick made sure to stay well back and mostly out of sight, had intentionally brought Jeremy to stand around and hinder her on scenting him out. He didn't want her to think he was checking up on her. She'd still been somewhat angry with him this morning and was trying to give her a bit of space today, to calm down all the way. In the hope that they could sit down and talk later. Perhaps today might be a turning point. Perhaps today they could start afresh. She had to know he was interested in her. It wasn't like he was trying to hide it, just letting however he felt when they were alone, show. Came across very playful, he smiled. He really did like playing with her. Nick wanted Lucinda to know he wanted their mate bond to work out, which he did. His understanding of Aluna and what she was to a pack was much better now. Even after a few days, he'd read with intent to learn and better himself. He also now understood why his mated wolves were so happy at just the mention of their bonded partner. Why they were always touching and teasing each other. The electric tingling that he felt when touching Lucinda was amazing. No other she-wolf had ever made him feel it. He hadn't even looked at another since scenting her out, didn't want to. She was it for him and he knew it. And just thinking about playing and teasing her for no other reason than it was fun, made him smile. He stood watching her and could see she was going to be a good mother. She'd been good with her twin sisters. But these pups would be strangers to her and still she played with them just like the twins. Their pups would be loved and cherished by her, without a doubt. Pups. Rip agreed, picking up on Nick's use of the plural not the singular. Nick's mouth twitched into a grin. He'd only ever wanted one, but standing here watching her. He knew deep down, there would be more than one. Denny was right. Once you found your mate everything changed for you. Nick watched and allowed his thoughts to wander a little. What would it feel like to have her tell him she was pregnant, to place his hand on her swollen belly and feel his pup, growing inside of her? Feel it move and use his alpha-enhanced senses to hear its tiny heartbeat while still in utero. Agreed, Nick told Rip. More than one, he could already see it. A whole litter. Rip snorted. I won't stand for anything less. Nick chuckled at Rip. His wolf was very determined for a litter. 6 pups was a lot to ask for. I might just allow it, he told Rip. Not up to you. If she wants, we will give. Deal. Nick agreed. It was her choice anyway. Jeremy interrupted his and Rip's conversation, by pulling him out of the gym and taking them away from looking at their mate. Annoyed both of them. What? He nearly snarled at the man, showing his displeasure. Class will be over in a few minutes. Let's not get caught spying. You're already in the doghouse. Jeremy had chuckled at his annoyance and chose his words on purpose. Nick could however see the man's point. Though both he and Rip wanted to stay and watch till the end, they were supposed to be giving her space. Headed back to his office, she looked good with the pups, he mused. A natural, I'd say. Jeremy agreed with him, not to mention Lunas are usually good with little ones as well. Got yourself a good 2-for-1 deal there, he elbowed Nick and winked at him. Nick laughed softly. I like seeing her like that. Happy, I mean. They walked into his office and Nick's smile evaporated into a frown. Turned to Jeremy. See what you have done, he snapped. That kitty high chair was back behind his desk, and his leather chair was gone. Jeremy laughed. Hey, I was with you the whole time. Blame Brady or Kevin for that one. If you hadn't taken that stupid photo and shared it to them, none of this would be happening. Nick shot right back. Oh come on, Nick, no one would have believed me, without a photo for proof. Perhaps I should show it to Lucinda. Bet she'd get a kick out of it. Don't you? I will kill you. He stood staring at the man. His choice for a beta, his best friend, and wondered not for the first time, how they'd ended up being so close. The man clearly had a death wish, where he and Rip were concerned. It was likely only a matter of time as to which joke pushed he or Rip over the edge. They did have a temper, but it was mostly kept in check because he didn't want to be anything like his father or brothers. But it did escape him every now and then. Never. Jeremy continued to smile at him. You need me around, to lighten the mood sometimes. Make you realize work all the time is not good for you. Besides, Nick, I'll just go and hide behind Lucinda now. He winked at Nick. I'd be willing to bet she'd protect me from you. He laughed again. Oh, and from what I saw yesterday, my bet is on her winning. Shut it. Nick snapped. Go and find my chair. Nick still didn't want to think about their showdown yesterday. If he hadn't dropped all of his weight onto her, she would have won. If she'd had him on the ground already in that chokehold, she would have won. Tiny woman was strong even without her wolf. Skilled too, had nearly dislocated his knee and blocked his airway in a matter of seconds. Took him completely by surprise. Probably should have seen it coming, considering she'd been spoiling for a fight with him. Stupidly turned his back on an angry she-wolf spoiling to take his head off. If it had been just her and him in their bedroom or in this office, he'd likely have lost to her. Had only done what he did, not to lose in front of his alpha unit and pack warriors. If they'd been alone, he'd have not risked hurting her at all. Nick still didn't like that she'd ended up with a mild concussion, because she'd hit her head on the ground, under the force of his weight. She was small and light compared to him. He was just very thankful she hadn't broken any bones with the impact. Also thankful that Kyra had stayed out of it. He would have lost regardless if Kyra had been there. A full minute passed and no Jeremy. That man was not coming back with his chair, he just knew it. Nick picked up the kitty high chair and returned it to the packhouse dining room and went looking for his actual chair. Found it in the Alpha Unit bar. No culprits though. They would wait. He sat down and flicked through the Luna ceremony book again. It was way too much planning for him, along with his regular duties as an alpha, and not knowing exactly what she liked either, didn't help. The whole ceremony should be tailored around her own preferences, color choice, flower arrangements, foods, drinks, music, even the guest list, everything about her for her presented by him to show her he knew and understood her, wanted to give her everything she could possibly want. Nick could see why the previous Luna handled it. Nick sighed and put it down. He had to find a place for her office to go as well. That was on his agenda this afternoon and he'd have to have it built and decorated, not that he was sure of what went in it. Had yet to come across a description of a Luna's office. Goddess, he was likely going to have to call Lindy, for advice on it. Yes, she was going to love it. That could wait. He shook his head, trying to get the thought of Lindy telling him what to do, expecting him to do everything she wanted, out of his head. Let's just find the right place for it, Granny would probably know. Jeremy could go and make himself useful, go speak with the cranky old wolf after lunch. He sat in his desk and looked around his office. A frown touched his face as he looked at the far wall on his right. There had used to be a door there, it had not gone anywhere. He'd had the useless door removed only to find a wall there already. It had confused him, but nothing about his father or brothers surprised him. He walked over to it, run his hand along the wall, stepped outside his office and realized there was a lot of dead space, between his office and the elevator that went upstairs, right before the hallway that lead down to the packhouse's communal dining area and massive kitchen. Jeremy, get me the packhouse original blueprints. Sure boss, his beta voice coming back down the line. It only took 10 minutes for the man to return to his office with rolled up old blueprints in his hand. Nick laid them out on his desk, already having cleared a space to do so. What you looking for, Nick? Dead space, between my office and the elevator. I have always wondered about that myself. Do you recall there used to be a door over there? Nick pointed without looking. Vaguely. Why? What was behind it? Who knows, your family were odd to say the least. Nick found it, right there next to his office, a room with an adjoining door to his and a door out to the foyer as well, a bathroom and a closet. Jeremy looked at it as Nick tapped it. Odd, maybe a private bedroom, for you to utilize at will. Get me a sledgehammer, let's open it up and see. Sweet. Jeremy was rubbing his hands together, a look of glee on his face. I like breaking things, and he was off. Came back in record time, still grinning, carrying 2 sledgehammers. Quincy the pack builder, he'd probably gotten the tools from trailing him, looked a little winded, probably had trouble keeping up with Jeremy, who'd clearly used Cal's speed to go and come back. Wait. Let me look-see first. Don't want you go breaking a load-bearing wall, now Alpha. Quincy looked at the plans, walked across the room to the wall, hit it here. He marked it with a marker and stepped out of the way. Jeremy was already headed over. It didn't take long for Nick and Jeremy to smash through the wall and step into the room. Quincy strolled in after them and flicked on a flashlight to look around, found a light switch and flipped it. The surge of power blew the old light bulb. I'll go get a new one, he said, and handed over the flashlight. Nick turned it on the room. It was an office. Not unlike his. A large desk and chair, covered in years of dust, a once plush-looking couch and matching chairs, cream and pink, now old and faded. The dusty curtains were a dark pink in color, and there was very large portrait behind the desk, of a beautiful woman, blonde hair, blue eyes, tall and slender, wearing a deep red dress, and sitting next to her was a large white wolf, with brilliant blue eyes. The painting was old and caked in dust as well, but he understood. She's the Luna, he said aloud. This was probably her office. Jeremy agreed, very girly. There were rows of shelving, all empty now. The windows were all sealed over, one on either side of the desk. The door to the foyer was still there, but knew it wasn't on the other side, couldn't recall even as a child a door being there. The carpet was threadbare and tattered, ripped in several places. The light suddenly came on. Quincy was back and had fitted a new globe. Where he'd found something that old who knew. A low whistle came from the man as he looked at the portrait. He was getting a good look at the old dusty room. The rips and tears in the carpet looked as thought a fight had happened, and a wolf-on-wolf fight, at that, or at least a wolf-enhanced fight. They were claw marks. And there was old blood stains too. It was all over the place. Whatever happened in this room had been something fierce, and someone had likely died. His eyes turned back to the portrait. had she died in this room or had there been a battle to save her in this room? The way it was shut up, her mate had never wanted to come in here again. That much he understood. Who was she? He asked Quincy, turning to look at the man. He shrugged. Before my time, I think. Need someone older, Alpha. Granny might know, she's almost 100. He watched Jeremy take a picture. Well, this will solve my problem of finding a place for Lucinda's Luna office. Nick nodded. Quincy, get this place opened up, cleaned out and updated. I want a clean slate, a blank canvas for now. Sure thing. I will have my son's team on it first thing tomorrow. You want all the windows and door back, layout the same? Yes, your son's team. Mine's working on the new school, Alpha. Nick nodded. Don't damage that. He indicated to the portrait. Take it to the library and have it cleaned and hung. Yes, Alpha. Might want to let Lucinda choose her own furnishings and color palette. Nick agreed. She's all about pastels. If I tried it'd end up like my office. He half smiled. Perhaps a good project for her to do. And she'd be right here next to him all day every day. He did like that, could stroll in here and spend time with her any time he liked. He would always know where she was too. He'd have the place cleaned out first and air it. It was quite musty in here. Then he would bring her here and show her. Hopefully it would bring them a bit closer. He was certain she noticed there was no Luna's office on his tour. Coming from a pack that had one and all 37. Lucinda POV. It had not been nice hearing that conversation. Lucinda didn't know what to make of it at all. Maybe she needed to find someone to talk to, about the pack's history or Nick in particular. What was he like? Didn't think his unit would say anything bad about him, to be honest. The Alpha unit was usually completely loyal to the Alpha even in opinions. She walked through the pack house to the communal dining room, grabbed a sandwich to go and a bottle of water, headed out the back door to explore. Nick might not want to show her the pack map, but she could figure it out on her own. Walking around and exploring a good way. There was a path off the back of the pack house that led right off into the forest. She strolled over to it and followed it along a meandering path, well over an hour before she found herself standing by a small lake. She sank down on the grass and relaxed. The place was quiet, there was a nice breeze blowing through the trees. She noted that there was no one out here, even though it was a nice day, not a single wolf out here. Caught wind of a scent, a little while later while laying and cloud watching. Kyra's ears pricked up and they both looked around, spotted a bear in the distance, other side of the lake. It was too far away for her to worry about. If she left it alone, it would leave her alone, she guessed. Not many bears where she come from. None actually, this was the first time she was seeing one for real. Best we go. Kyra piped up few minutes later, as he nosed its way in this direction. Lucinda didn't argue, her wolf's instincts were not to be ignored. She strolled back the way she'd come. Saw a tiny woman walking in the woods. Probably shouldn't leave her out here with bears around. Lucinda headed towards her. Do you need assistance, ma'am? She asked as she approached. The tiny woman turned to look at her. Lucinda was surprised to see was an older wolf. Though how old she couldn't tell. Could be a pack elder, she thought. The older woman looked at her shocked, clearly surprised to see anyone out here at all. Who are you? She put her nose in the air, trying to smell her, Lucinda thought. I'm Lucinda, she answered. Are you alone out here? She looked around, couldn't see anyone at all. Of course I am, I live out here. By yourself? That surprised Lucinda even more. I might be old, young lady, but I'm not useless and I still bite. Lucinda chuckled softly, liked her already. Why don't you come and have some tea? the older woman asked her. Lucinda nodded. Okay, she wasn't doing anything else, and she could do with someone to talk to. A new friend maybe. Bitey just like herself. This woman was older, had a few streaks of grey in her brown hair, but really didn't look much more than 50, perhaps Lucinda would be able to get some answers about the pack from her. They walked in companionable silence for a good 15 minutes, and then a small cabin came into view. This is where you live? Yes. I like being on my own. Oh. Do you get many visitors? Lucinda asked. Wolves were pack animals, not often they lived alone, usually that was rogue behavior. Of late, yes. It seems I'm quite popular. But my grandson comes often. Jer's such a good boy. Always brings the rum. Lucinda wondered who Jer's was, and why he was happy to have his grandmother all the way out here alone. She just smiled though. They stepped into the cabin and Lucinda offered to make the tea, assisting the older woman to a comfortable chair. Everything's in the kitchen, she was told. All good, I know my way around a kitchen. How do you have your tea? Call me Granny, my dear. Just black will do fine. Lucinda busied herself about the kitchen. It was a little messy and a few dishes were piled up in the sink. While she waited for the kettle to boil, she washed them and placed them in the dish rack to dry. 2 cups of tea made, Lucinda took them to Granny and smiled down at her. May I ask why you live out here? After my only daughter died, she shrugged. Didn't want to live in town anymore. Oh, what about Jer's though? A good boy, that one. Knows right from wrong, he does. She sipped her tea and watched Lucinda for a long time, said nothing. Then you must be the future Lunahe. Oh. I guess, she shrugged. Haven't really been getting on well, here. Don't you worry about that Frost boy. I walloped him good the other day, when he was visiting here with Jers. That got her attention. Jers must be Jeremy, your grandson is the beta. Ah, don't hold that against him, he's got a good heart. Mischief maker from what I hear. Lucinda smiled at her. I did have to whack him too. Though all in good fun. What brings you out here to nowhere? I'm not allowed to do anything. Being punished for hurting pack members during training. Did they deserve it? Granny asked without hesitation. No, I was just mad, at Nick. Ah, what did that clueless boy do now? Lucinda frowned. Clueless? What is he clueless about? You, my dear. Hey. Let's just say, not the smartest bringing up. But from what I saw, he's willing to learn. Learn what? Lucinda was very curious now. Was Nick out here talking to Granny about her? Why? A lot of stuff he doesn't know. Lucinda frowned. That was not helpful to her. Granny, can you tell me about him or the pack? I could, but wouldn't you rather ask him yourself? She answered a question with a question. Raising an eyebrow at her. We're not really talking. Or I'm not talking to him. What did the clueless boy do? Lucinda sighed. She had no idea if she could bring Nick and her issues up with Granny, he might get mad at her and restrict her even more. He would surely find out, seeing as the beta was Granny's grandson. It's all right, dearie, I'm not much of a Frost family fan myself, to be honest. What do you want to know about the pack? Anything about your mate you should ask him yourself. That was fair. She thought the pack's history not good. His father was overthrown and killed by his eldest son Alex. Alex was killed by Liam, and Nick alpha dueled Liam 5 years ago to take over. It's a much better pack now, with Nicholas in charge. They all alpha dueled each other for control of the pack? The lot of them. She'd heard rumors but never really believed it. Yes, dearie, this pack was not healthy back then, a bit of a nightmare to live in. Brutally so for all, regardless of rank. Nicholas, even though a frost boy, does seem to have brought about good changes, and has made everyone feel safe now. Lucinda sighed. Granny, I heard something today, I probably wasn't meant to hear. What is it, dearie? Tell Granny. That Nick just wants an air out of me and then will toss me aside. Her heart was heavy just saying the words, but if Granny wasn't a fan of Nick's, perhaps she would get an honest answer or opinion. Did you hear Nick say that? Granny's voice now had an angry edge to it, and she was frowning deeply. No, some women were talking, casually chatting, and didn't even know I was there to hear them. I don't even want to try, Granny. If that's the case. She felt sad, even felt tears burn her eyes, though blinked them away. Felt stupid, they weren't even marked or mated and she was now, just confused about so much. Dumb girls. Granny reached out and pat Lucinda's knee. From my understanding, that is not what he intends to do. Her voice was firm and reassuring. How much do you understand? Lucinda asked. A fair bit. I'm guessing. The boy never came here before. The only time I laid eyes on him before your arrival, was when Jers took me to swear allegiance to him, after he took over 5 years ago. May I ask, why he came to see you? Might want to ask him that one yourself. Though Jers was in hysterics practically the whole time they were here. That frost boy, not happy about it. Told my Jers to shut it. Got a good walloping, with my cane for that he did. Lucinda covered her mouth, at the image that popped into her head, of this tiny woman giving Nick a walloping, probably very funny to watch. Bet he didn't like that much. Didn't have much choice. You want my help, you do as I say. She smiled at Lucinda. Jers likes the man, so I doubt he's too bad a fellow. Try not to worry too much. I will try not to. Lucinda nodded, thought it wasn't going to be easy. I'll let Jers know you're here and he can come get you. Lots of bears around these parts and it's breeding season, best not to wander on your own. I'm fine. Kyra is big and real bitey too, Granny. She grinned. Granny nodded and tilted her head to look at her again, then nodded. Here, take my cane. Scare that frost boy with it for me. Feel free to prod my grandson if he needs it too, but only in fun for my boy. Lucinda nodded. Will do, Granny. Now stand up and let these old eyes get a good look at my Luna. Don't see as well as I used to now. Lucinda didn't believe that statement for a second, but stood and turned around when directed to. Small critter, aren't you? Not as small as you, Granny. She chuckled. My wolf is large though, she'd amaze you. Lucinda smiled proudly about Kyra. I'd like to meet her one day. You'd better head off, before I get in trouble for keeping you in bear country. Haha, they don't know where I am, I won't tell if you don't. She did feel a bit better. Granny just knew how to make her laugh and feel lighter. Granny laughed heartily and walked her out. Just pop that cane, where the frost boy can see it now, dearie, and plead ignorance. Lucinda smiled, as she walked away down the path they had come up, back to the original trail that would lead back to the pack house. Saw a few deer stop walking and watch her. She walked on slowly by, not wanting to disturb them or that massive buck, with huge horns, which was standing in front of his herd, watching her. Lucinda walked into the pack house and right into Jeremy. His eyes moved to the cane in her hand. Now, where did you get that? He asked, his mouth twitching into a smile. I don't know what you're talking about, Jers. She smiled right back at him and strolled on past him. Oh, is that how you wanna play it? He laughed. Granny and I have no secrets. Go ask. She turned and looked at him. She smiled right back at him, but be warned, this and now my walloping stick. For you and the frost boy. She twirled it around in her hand and feinted at him with it. He dodged out of the way and grinned right at her. Good to see you made a friend. So did Alpha Corey agree to throw in a bottle of his pink gin? Why yes he did. Jeremy smirked at her. No cheating now. Hey, cheating, let's see if I even agree to it, at all. She walked away from him and twirled the cane again. Come on Lucinda, you will right, there was no playfulness in that question, a little concerned she thought. She just shrugged. I don't honestly know, and she didn't, at this very moment in time. He didn't follow or ask any more questions. 38. Nick POV. Walking into the packhouse dining room, Nick was surprised to see Lucinda sitting at the table he and his unit used to eat. She was sitting with Kevin and Brady having a meal. This would be the first time she had willingly come down for a meal with him and his unit. Or his unit, seeing as he wasn't there. She had to know though, that he was likely to turn up and sit for a meal himself at that table. They were all chatting away, a three-way conversation. His eyes met hers and she stopped talking instantly. Nick sighed internally at her stopping of interaction with his unit. Clearly whatever she had been talking to them about, she wasn't interested in him hearing. He smiled at her, though not with all his charm, just gently trying to convey to her that he was happy she was here to eat with him and his unit. Hoped for a good reaction. She didn't appear to be angry, at least, no glaring at him. That was better than nothing, he guessed. He walked over and got himself dinner, came back and sat down next to her. Did you have a nice day? He had seen her with the pups in the gym, she'd been very happy this morning. Nick hoped the rest of her day had gone just as well. Yes, she nodded. But didn't elaborate any further. Still not ready to talk to him yet, he thought. Just let it go, had to, he knew why she was mad, just had to wait it out. Jeremy sank down in the chair next to her, and Nick watched as she turned to him right away and smiled big. Ticked him off a bit, but he had to try and squash it. She needed to interact with his unit as much as him, learn to trust them too. He didn't like how she and Jeremy had seemed to have an instant connection. Even back in her pack, they had teased each other and laughed along with her antics. Nick saw Jeremy's eyes glaze over, knew she was having a conversation with him, privately. Could only manage one word for him, but it seemed was happy to chat with his whole unit freely. Annoying. Then suddenly Jeremy started to laugh, looked right at Nick and laughed even harder. What? He nearly snapped at Jeremy. Nothing boss, he reined in his laughing but was still smiling big. Nick's attention was drawn to both Kevin and Brady, who were now also laughing along with his beta. Nothing my ass, he muttered. Lucinda was sitting in her chair, biting her lower lip, trying not to laugh also it seemed. She was very cute when like this. He really did like seeing her happy, and he really didn't think he would get to see it so soon. There was definitely a good amount of bonding going on between her and his alpha unit. Though all of them laughing at the same time, and he not knowing what it was about, probably meant that he was the butt of some joke. Didn't like that at all, but did like that she was happy, so could let it pass. So Nick. Kevin interrupted his thoughts. Your car's paint job should be fixed by tomorrow. Nick turned his head and looked right at Lucinda. She had burst out laughing, her eyes were directly on him, but only briefly so. She lowered them, still laughing. Clearly still amused by what she and Kyra had done to his car. He hadn't dealt with that yet. Probably would never punish her for it, her realized. Why? May I ask, did you do that to my car? We never did get to have that conversation, he asked her. Lucinda was still giggling, trying to stop, but seemed to be having a hard time. It didn't help that all his boys were chuckling as well, they also had found it funny, and they appeared to be feeding off of each other's amusement. Oh! I didn't do it. That was all Kyra, you shouldn't go about ticking her off. Might cause you a world of pain. Then her eyes lifted right to his. Kyra was staring right at him. It was the first time Nick had seen her wolf fully on the surface, peering out from her human counterpart, in full control it seemed. Kyra placed a finger right under his chin. He could feel the tip of her claw which she had extended, showing him she was indeed in full control of Lucinda's body. I'll punish you. I'm no mutt. I am a Luna wolf. Kyra spoke directly to him. Her rip was up inside his mind instantly, his tail beating the ground, and Nick could feel that he was happy to see her, didn't push forward, just happy to see her for the first time like this, pushed forward her bright green eyes for all to see, the gruffness of her wolf's voice added to that of Lucinda's soft tones. He was really liking her on the surface. No, Kyra, you are not. My apologies for my rudeness, he told her with full sincerity in his voice. He did mean it. To Nick's surprise, she leaned all the way forward, standing to bring her eyes to meet directly with his, barely an inch of space between her face and his. You'll behave, boy, or I'll wallop you good, she told him, full amusement in her voice. Then she was gone, blinked away in an instant, leaving Lucinda staring at him. His eyes were very wide, not from her threat, but the words she had used on him. He saw Lucinda sit back down, desperately trying not to laugh so hard she fell off of her chair. One hand holding onto the table. Jeremy on the other hand did fall off of his chair, laughing so hard he was holding his abdomen. Kevin and Brady were now also laughing, they all knew what had happened up at Granny's cabin. But not Lucinda and Kyra. Now it seemed she did. He'd warned Jeremy. What did I tell you? He yelled at Jeremy. Watched as Jeremy picked himself up off the floor and sat back down on his chair. It wasn't me, man, it was Granny herself. He was still laughing. Couldn't help himself, it seemed, even in the face of Nick's anger. Nick turned his eyes on Lucinda. Had she wandered that far from the pack house? Why and when? Had to ask her. You went that far from the pack house? Apparently so. The laughing was gone. Am I not allowed to look around? She questioned him, though he knew the question was completely serious. She was still smiling, still trying not to laugh at the information she now had on him. Of course you are. But that is bear country, it's not safe up there. I saw, she nodded, clearly had seen a bear and either not cared or been bothered by it at all. Granny was very lovely. Hey Jers, she turned and looked at Jeremy. Nick watched as both Kevin and Brady's eyes turned to Jeremy, then looked at each other and back to Jeremy. Hey Jers, they said in unison. Goddess help me. Jeremy laughed and shook his head. Nick smirked now, at least he wasn't the only one, now going to be the butt end of a joke. Kevin and Brady were going to use that nickname on him to annoy him. About time the man had a little payback. How'd you find Granny's cabin? He returned his attention back to his mate. I didn't, I found Granny. So we had tea and a little chat. She smirked right at him. Tiny little wolf, but bitey I hear. I liked her, thought she was sweet. I didn't think so. Nick muttered. He watched as she laughed. Goddess, he like it, her laughing and being happy. If only she was like this all the time. Who knew what she and Granny had talked about? Hopefully nothing bad. Have much to say? He asked, curiosity getting the better of him. Answered some questions I had. I can see where Jer's here. She elbowed him in the ribs playfully. Gets his mischief streak from. Then she winked right at Jeremy and he grinned and winked right back at her. He didn't like how close they were, irked not just him but his wolf too. You can ask me anything you like, he told her, and he meant it. What would you like to know? Lucinda leaned back in her chair, it tipped back on the two back legs as she used her feet to push herself back and forth slightly, staring at him. Seemingly thinking about what to ask him, she sipped on her coffee, was tapping her fork on the table in front of her, seemed to be really contemplating what she wanted to know. He returned to his meal, picked up his glass of water, and as he took a mouthful nearly spat it out. When she asked, "How many she-wolves have you bedded from this pack?" her chair dropped with a thud back onto all four legs, as though she was making a point. The whole dining room fell silent, not just his alpha unit. Nick had not realized everyone was actively listening to their conversation, but apparently his pack was curious about their alpha and Luna. They'd not seen the two of them out and about, other than her first day here. He saw Lucinda turn at the sudden silence in the room and look at the pack members. Some were actually looking this way, at him, he realized. Then she turned back to him and raised an eyebrow, to follow up her question. Nick swallowed water over the hard lump suddenly in his throat. Luckily he had not actually spat it everywhere. Her timing of he question probably meant she was aiming to shock him. She had done that, that was for sure. Perhaps we could discuss that in private. Why? It appears I'm the only one that doesn't know. She nodded in the direction of he pack members, also waiting on his answer. A few, he answered. She tilted her head to the right, and arched her left eyebrow at him, smirked. Oh. I'm betting it's more than a few. From what I heard around the pack today, definitely more than a few. Nick frowned now. His pack members should know better than to talk about such things. Yes, he had a past and would, it seemed, have to discuss it with her. She was watching him, his reaction in fact very closely. I never said I didn't, he acknowledged. If you want to have that particular discussion, why don't we go to my office, or up to our suite, he offered calmly. His eyes were on her. She shrugged, not like I wasn't expecting it. You were so very sure of yourself. The day I walked into Alpha Corey's office. You made it very clear, to me, you get women in spades. Nick just continued to look at her. He couldn't deny that. He had gone into Alpha Corey's office dressed up, with all his arrogance and self-confidence, his ego about his good looks all on the surface, certain that she would take one look at him and swoon. None of them have ever been in my bed itself, he clarified for her, what he thought she was getting at. I know that. Samantha told me, she nodded simply. What? He was shocked. He'd not expected Samantha to talk about him, with Lucinda, when she'd been up in their suite with her. Casual chit-chat, but not specifically about him. He watched her go back to eating her meal. I'm curious as to how many are going to treat me like that one from training. Might as well just line them up, Nick. If they want a piece of Kyra, she is more than happy to let them try. I won't stop her either. It won't be like that, Lucinda. The number one rule here in my pack is not to interfere with wolves' bonded mates. She was staring right at him now. That's a very specific and weird rule to have. Do you have trouble with it? Under my previous brother Liam's reign, yes. Unfortunately, he nodded. Lucinda was still staring at him, looking for more of an explanation, he realized, so he elaborated. My brother was a brute and ruined the lives of many of my bonded pack members. Is it a problem now? No, he stated flatly. He didn't really want to talk about it. I put an end to it the minute I took over, I assure you. She nodded. Nick noticed the dining room chatter pick up again. His pack had turned their attention back to whatever they had been talking about before her impromptu question on his partners. He had no idea if she'd had any since her mate had died. Though what he recalled from Alpha Corey, he doubted it. She didn't attend mating balls, hadn't liked the attention, and Kyra was of the opinion not my mate, so definitely nothing since Kyra came along. Lucinda, would Kyra like to spend some time with Rib? He suddenly asked. Thinking about Kyra, he realized neither of their wolves had actually spent any time together, might be good for his own bonding with her, if her wolf and his got along, and he had no idea if that was going to be the case. Rip was certain they were going to. "Who's Rip?" she asked right back. "Goddess. I'm sorry," he instantly apologized to her and her wolf. "Rip is my wolf." He had not even realized he'd not actually told them his wolf's name. He watched as she appeared to discuss it with her wolf, could see the flicker of color changes in her eyes, as an indication they were communicating with each other. Nick knew Rip did want to spend time with Kyra. "In what capacity?" she asked. "Any, I guess." He shrugged nonchalantly. "No mating." Nick laughed. "Trust her to put that forward right away. I can't speak for Rip on that one, but he is aware of our agreement." "Let us think on it," she replied. Nick just nodded. If he was to agree to no mating her, would that sway her? "It's not her you have to sway," she answered casually. "Well, Rip would like to spend some time with his mate," Nick told her softly. "I heard you. My answer is still the same." Nick let it go for now. Rip was a little annoyed by her response as well. He could feel his wolf's annoyance with Lucinda, though nothing towards Kyra herself. Rip didn't think it was Kyra holding back. Lucinda only. At least they'd had an actual real conversation today without arguing. She didn't appear mad or angry with him either. It was nice. He was trying, and he thought, right this minute so was she. Perhaps her chat with Granny had gone well. Better than his. Or maybe Lucinda had asked questions about him and gotten some answers. Nick would prefer she asked him directly about himself or his pack, but seeing as they'd not been talking recently, it was unlikely. Dinner finished and he sat and just looked at her. Could he ask her to spend time with him, and if so, in what capacity would it be? Clearly intimacy was still out of the question. "What do you normally do after dinner? Train or go on patrol?" She looked right at him pointedly. Nick sighed. He was not ready to allow her either of those options on your days off. He pushed the question. "Spend it with Gabby and the twins," and suddenly got up from her chair. Nick heard the outright annoyance in her voice, and he knew why it was there. Didn't want to go back to arguing with her. "What do you enjoy doing, Lucinda?" He pushed again. Surely the girl had some interests or hobbies. He watched her walk away from the table, got up and followed her. They had to find some common ground, something that they could do together to help them get along and bond. "Training, working and training. Kyra and I are not much for sitting around doing nothing. Which is all we are allowed to do at this time." I believe she shot the last two words at him, a little anger in them. Nick sighed again. She was pushing her agenda at him, and was not willing to tell him anything about herself. So he ignored it. "Movies, books. You've got to give me something, Lucinda." "Do I?" She looked right at him. Her expression told him she didn't think so. "Please, I am trying here. I'm was often away with the retrieval unit, and when back in Half Moon Pack, I would train the twins, then I would patrol the night shift on the busiest border. That's pretty much it. Occasionally Gabby and Lindy and I would have a girl a night and see how much we could annoy Alpha Corey and his unit. But that is it." Nick frowned at her. How could she have no downtime at all? That was not right. Would drive anyone insane, nearly had done him in. Jeremy had made sure he didn't work all day every day when he'd taken over. Nick had tried it, found himself tired and grumpy, an angry man within just 3 months of taking over. Jeremy had insisted on dragging him out of the office and forced him to not work to relax. He and his unit had downtime now, every night a movie or a drink in the Alpha bar, play billiards or darts. They generally didn't do anything at all on a Saturday and only Alpha training on a Sunday, just the 4 of them. Only ever were busy on weekends if there was a visiting alpha or rogues loose on the borders. Do you not have downtime? He was following her to the elevator. Surely you don't just work and train all day every day. 6 days a week. Kyra doesn't like to be bored. Gets very destructive. You'll find out soon enough, I imagine, with not letting her do what she is born for. Born for? He frowned at her now. Yes, she is a fighter and loves being out on border patrol. The elevator opened and she got in, turned and looked at him. I'm sure, she'll cost you a pretty penny at some point. She smirked right at him. What? He asked, a bit confused. In replacing whatever she destroys. Nick watched Lucinda laugh as the door closed. It was kind of a little menacing, he thought. He didn't think she was kidding, and he'd not missed he green in her eyes. Kyra had been right there laughing as well. Probably should give them something to do. Rip huffed, clearly not liking the turn of events either. Sounds like it. Nick agreed with his wolf. Once her office space was cleared out and cleaned up, she'd have plenty to do, shopping for furniture, choosing a color palette, or theme, decorating her office, probably take up some time. He had been going to wait to show her, but perhaps that comment and laugh had been more of a warning. Perhaps now was as good a time as any. They could sit in their suite and spend some time together, go over it right now. He headed for his office, snapped a picture of the blueprints of the Luna's office and headed upstairs. 39. Lucinda POV. Lucinda had been snagged by Kevin and Brady to have dinner with them. They were both grinning at her. The comment she'd gotten was, "We've got the most hilarious thing for you to see. But you can't ever tell Nick." That had grabbed at her and Kyra's attention right away, so she had gone with them to find out what it was. Thought they wouldn't tell her, until she had food on a plate in front of her, and was sitting down at their allocated Alpha Unit table. The picture that Kevin had turned to her, from his phone, nearly made her choke on her mouth full of coffee. She reached out and took the phone from him to get a real good look at it, couldn't believe her own eyes, as she giggled at it. "Where did you get this from?" It was hysterically funny, a picture of Nick sitting in a very tiny chair, maybe only a foot high, his impossibly large build looking very uncomfortably and very out of place. She sent a copy of it right to her phone. Jeremy took it the other day. They both were laughing. "Oh, I need to send it to Lindy," she giggled. "Already done?" Jeremy did it and tagged it for his mother. Kevin grinned at her. Lucinda laughed so hard her chair rocked backwards and she nearly fell off it, had to grab the table to stop herself tipping over backwards and ending up on the floor. "Does he know?" she snorted. "No," Brady chuckled. "Nick would kill him." "Well, I guess it's game on here, in the Alpha Unit then." Lucinda got to sit there and listen to the two of them, tell her how they had already replaced his office chair with a kitty-high chair, that it had been waiting for him, in his office when he'd come back from Granny's, where the photo had been taken. "Granny's, you say?" She grinned right at the two of them. "Well, I got some fun there too, wanna hear?" "Yeah," they both chorused together. It was right then that she spotted Nick coming into the dining room. He was looking right at her. All she would have to tell them later, about meeting Granny by chance, that Granny had given her the cane she'd walloped him with. They turned to look and see Nick as well. Knew their conversation was over for now. "We can chat later." Kevin sent down the mind link. Lucinda smiled and thought, "Ah, with it I got Granny's cane to scare him with," she replied through the mind link. It was a private conversation. Nick couldn't impose on it without them all knowing, and he couldn't hear it unless they wanted him to. Lucinda saw Kevin pass it straight to Brady and the two of them grinned right at her. Nick sat and wanted to make small talk. She'd spent the afternoon thinking about what Granny had told her. That she didn't think Nick would do as those women had said he would. She was really trying to believe it. so answered his questions. When Jeremy sat down in the chair next to her, couldn't help herself but turned towards him, knew he was the primary mischief maker and had to let him know she was in on the joke. I hear you took a funny photo of your alpha, sent it to his mother. She mind-linked him. I did. Jeremy replied, then burst out laughing. She watched him look at Nick and laugh some more, then everyone at the table was laughing except for Nick. He didn't seem too happy about it either. Lucinda bit her lip trying not to laugh so much, trying to contain her own amusement, but Kevin just had to go and bring up Kyra scratching up Nick's car. It was her undoing and she couldn't help but look at him, tried to catch his expression. They'd never gotten around to discussing it. Kyra was chortling inside of her mind, still found it funny it seemed. When Lucinda thought about it, she'd not even been reprimanded about it. Walking into Alpha Corey's off for the reprimand had found he and her as each other's mate, seemed to have overridden the offense Kyra had put to him. Haha, being his mate had saved both their butts from Alpha Corey and Nick's wrath, she now realized. Oh, how Alpha Corey must have found it amusing, probably would have thrown it right in Nick's face. He'd have wanted to place bets on it the minute he knew she was his mate. Probably had. Nick had been dressed to the nines that day. Not knowing she and Kyra were the bane of his existence at the time. He'd clearly been out to impress her, she had not known he was her mate at the time either, so hadn't thought anything of going into that office. Alpha Corey, she imagined had been informed, probably given a description. She thought, that was why his whole Alpha unit had been in his office for her punishment. The minute Nick had informed Alpha Corey, all bets were on. He'd told them all. Found it highly amusing himself. Knew everyone was going to get a kick out of it. Lucinda could see a good bit of annoyance in Nick's expression, when he'd asked her why she'd done it and Kyra wanted to answer him. Lucinda didn't stop her. Her wolf, though amused with her own antics, still had a bone to pick with him it seemed. To Lucinda's horror she announced herself as a Luna wolf, not something Lucinda wanted him to know. The sharp claw to his chin, was just to show him of her control, that she expected an answer from him, and he actually did apologize directly to Kyra. Kyra was happy with his apology. Then leaned right over to him. Lucinda knew Kyra was going to play with him, as she was now happy and in a good mood after his apology. You'll behave, boy. Or I'll wallop you good, she echoed some of Granny's words at him. Full amusement in her tone. Even Lucinda couldn't not be amused with Kyra or her statement. The whole table erupted in laughter. Jeremy fell off his chair, he laughed so hard. Jeremy had to tell him it wasn't him but Granny who'd informed her. Nick's head had whipped around to look at her. Clearly shocked and unhappy, about her wandering so far away from the pack house, it being bear country and all. She couldn't help but tease Jeremy with Granny's nickname for him, to her own delight. No one but knew about it except Nick. The smug smirk on his face told her, he'd already known about it. Nick was obviously curious about her conversation with Granny, perhaps there was more there to embarrass him, though that photo was going to be locked away for future torment. Might just have to get it printed out, she mused to herself. Lindy and Gabby would definitely be in on that. No pink gin even required on that one. When he'd told her to ask him anything she like. Lucinda actually sat back and looked right at him. Anything, hey? There was a great many things she could ask him. But only one annoyed her today. Granny had tried to alleviate her fears about his intention, but the other thing she'd overheard today, did she really want the answer to? Not really, but he had said anything. Let's find out if he would answer anything and out himself. She purposefully waited for him to take a drink before asking him her question. How many she-wolves have you bedded in this pack? Lucinda watched his eyes go wide, but it was the complete hush, that fell over the room that made her wonder if the whole pack knew, or if they wondered, whether he was going to answer her question as was she. Jeremy, Kevin, and Brady were all quiet now, all laughter and amusement gone from them now. She knew they would know the answer or roughly how many. Also knew none of them would likely tell her either. It was not their place, it was Nick's. So she asked, putting him right on the spot. Perhaps we could discuss it in private, he'd answered with a sigh. Why? She shot right back at him. I'm the only one who doesn't know, it seems. She indicated the quiet of the dining room. A few, he'd finally said. The frown that marred his face, following her next statement, said it all. He'd not expected anyone in his pack to talk about him and his past amount of partners. It appeared he was willing to discuss it with her though, just not in public. Interesting. What difference it made, she couldn't understand. It was clear from the hush that had fallen, most knew of his history. She'd seen the way he'd dressed, the smile on his face, that day he'd been expecting to meet her, the first time as her mate. The man knew he was good looking, played it to his advantage, had tried to do so, with her back in Half Moon Pack. Took great delight, it seemed, in putting on a show for her every morning here, teasing her and trying to get her to look at him, naked, half naked, any way he could. It must bother him, that he hadn't been able to seduce her yet. Probably never had anyone turn him down ever, until her. His comment about none of them ever having been in his actual bed, surprised her a little. Was he trying to tell her something? That none of them mattered to him? It was likely, though he didn't like that she'd already found that out by herself. He also didn't like her offer to let them line up so Kyra could have a piece of them. I will. Kyra piped up if need be. Lucinda already knew this. Kyra didn't want anyone touching her mate, or even talking about having done so. Anyone who wanted to challenge her over him, she would gladly step up to. He was her mate, as far as Kyra was concerned. He belonged to her and her alone. When he'd suddenly changed the topic and asked if Kyra wanted to spend time with Rip, she had known who he was talking about, his wolf. It was pretty darn obvious, but they'd not had a formal introduction yet, so she played dumb. He'd apologized and told her Rip was his wolf. Kyra was up instantly. She did want her mate. Had purred at him the other day and he right back at her. But Nick's bleeding them into the pack had left them both angry. Kyra angry with her own mate, not understanding why he had allowed it to happen at all. She, though Rip should have put a stop to it. Though she didn't appear angry anymore, just wanted to play games with him. Lucinda wondered if it was wise, they could mate in wolf for or human for that matter, just push forward and take control of their human counterpart and shove them way to the back. Do as they pleased once in control. They could mark each other in human form, not giving her the choice she was supposed to have according to their mating alliance. He'd laughed when she commented on the no mating. Probably meant that he wouldn't stop his wolf if he tried to. I won't mate him, Kyra told her, as a way for Lucinda to agree to it. But she was not swayed by his lack of concern, and not being able to speak for his wolf. Telling her that Rip agreed not to mate her wolf so that they could spend time together. Maybe he thought it was Kyra he had to sway. Made Lucinda wonder if his wolf, though Kyra wasn't interested or trusting of his wolf. She cleared that up. Only to have him repeat that Rip wanted to spend time with his mate. Lucinda was not sold on the idea. She had no idea what his wolf was like. If his wolf was anything like Nick, he would be all about mating her. Kyra huffed in annoyance at her resistance to the idea, but that was all, appeared to let it go for now. Nick trailed her all the way to the elevator asking questions about what she liked to do. Even when she told him, he didn't seem to believe her or couldn't understand. He offered up movies and books, clearly thinking she'd misunderstood his line of questioning. stated he was trying. She guessed he was trying to find some sort of common ground. Was not, it appeared, happy with her work ethic and pushed her on what she did on her downtime. So again she laid it out for him more directly: 6 days a week. Kyra doesn't like to be bored, gets very destructive, even told him it would likely cost him a pretty penny. She and Kyra had laughed at that thought. Oh, he had no idea at all, just how close to her threshold he was, at this very moment. Lucinda strolled into the Alpha suite and headed right for the shower. A nice long hot shower would do her some good. She'd never seen him come to bed, felt him get in once, but he'd always been in his office when she'd gone to bed, or that was where she presumed he was anyway. When she stepped out of the bathroom in her towel, and found him lounging on the bed, came to a complete dead stop and just stared at him. His eyes moved over here slowly, taking in her near nakedness. Only a towel covering her. The smile on his face said it all. He knew he'd surprised her completely, liked it too. He was still wearing the same clothes as at dinner, but his feet were bare and crossed at the ankle. He was not intending on going back downstairs, apparently settled here for the night. Now, that is a lovely sight. In your dreams. Lucinda shot at him and headed for the walk-in. Oh, every night, I assure you, he chuckled as she walked off, thankfully made no effort to follow her. Lucinda had never walked about the suite in her pajamas, with him around. In fact, had never really had to deal with him at all in the suite, other than the exception of in the mornings when she woke up. Looked down at her tiny satin shorts and matching cami, probably needed to get some other sort of pajamas to sleep in. There wasn't much to these ones and no bra either. She didn't own a dressing gown. Being a naturally warm-blooded creature, this was all that she slept in. Even when she was without her wolf, she'd always run hot. Any more than what she had on, and she'd be too hot and wanting to peel off layers. Lucinda knew that she couldn't stay in the walk-in forever, but also didn't want to walk out there like this, which was completely ridiculous. He'd seen her naked that day out the front of her house, and in her swimmers, which had covered far less of her, as had her gym clothes during training. "What's wrong, my dear?" He appeared in the doorway to the walk-in. His tone was full of amusement. He knew she didn't want to come out in her sleepwear. "Afraid I'll jump on you." "You might," she muttered, and had to push past him in the doorway to the walk-in. He was taking up most of the room, likely on purpose. "Never thought you would be the shy type," he commented. "Not after all your talk about wolves being naked all the time." He was following her as she headed for the kitchen. "I'm not," she shot over her shoulder. "I don't trust you." Nick actually laughed softly. "I'm abiding by our agreement, am I not?" Lucinda knew, he had her on that one. He really was abiding by it, it seemed. She watched as he leaned on the kitchen counter and watched her as she put the kettle on. "Hot chocolate?" she asked him, seeing as she was going to make one herself. Nick's nose wrinkled up and he shook his head. "Too sweet, for my liking." "Fair enough. I wanted to discuss something with you." Lucinda felt him directly behind her as she put a cup on the kitchen counter, an arm on either side of her. He dropped his chin right onto her right shoulder and held his phone in front of her. His body was not pressed up against her, but she could feel the body heat. He was awfully close to her. Her eyes moved to the phone. He seemed very comfortable invading her personal space. She tried to ignore it. "What is it?" she asked, focusing on the phone he was holding for her to look at. It was a picture of what looked like a blueprint. "Your office, once cleaned out and ready for you to decorate." He spoke softly and directly into her ear. "You're too close." She couldn't help but tell him. She needed more space. Though Kyra was happy, she noted. Lucinda could feel her own heart beating faster inside her chest. His closeness was actually physically affecting her. "I get closer, sleeping in bed with you," he teased her, his voice dropping to a deep husky note. It was obvious he had picked up on her body's reaction to his. "Please Nick," and she heard her own tone, practically pleading with him she was. His lips brushed her ear in a soft kiss. "Can we sit and discuss it?" he asked, then stepped away from her, giving her the space she'd asked for. He had been way too close for her not to react to him. Kyra was purring softly, though she didn't think Nick knew, his wolf would likely have reacted to hers. But she'd picked up on the fact that she'd also been holding her breath, so he would have too. Being an alpha, his senses would be heightened and he wouldn't miss something like that. Not when he was so close to her, his tone of voice told her he knew. She could feel him watching her. "I guess we can," she answered his question, trying to keep her tone even, and the slight tremble she felt out of it. "Where would you like to sit? The lounge or our bed?" he teased her. Oh yes, he'd definitely picked up on her body's reaction to his being so close. Today had been a little rough on her where he was concerned. She knew she'd been bonding with him, albeit slowly, but to have felt actual pain and have tears form. She now knew she and Kyra were more attached than she had realized. He'd told her to ask him anything. Granny had told her he'd made this pack a better place and that she didn't think that he would hurt her like those women had said. She stood there biting her lip, uncertain. Her mating alliance clauses, all seemed to fall into line with what those women had said today, that conversation she'd overheard. She needed more space from him. It already hurt. How much worse would it get, and how quickly so? His hand touched her shoulder gently. "What's wrong?" he asked. His voice was not teasing anymore, must have picked up on her sudden change of mood. He turned her to face him, tilted her chin up to look at him. Lucinda pushed his hand away from her. "Nothing," she said, grabbed her cup and walked away from him over to the kettle and stood waiting for it to boil. "It's not nothing, Lucinda. Just ask me, I will answer you," he said. She could hear the frown in his voice. "Are you only after an heir from me?" burst out of her so fast she couldn't hold it in. She needed to know, had to hear it from his own mouth. Her eyes moved to him. He looked very shocked by her sudden and abrupt question. "No, Lucinda. I am not," he said slowly. "How do I know that?" she questioned him, unable to hold it in, any more than the first question. His head tilted, ever so slightly as he looked at her. "Why, suddenly are you concerned? That's all I want, it's not. Just so you know." Lucinda turned away from him. "Can you actually prove it?" she muttered. She didn't want to be hurt and it was already a certainty that she would be. She already knew it. What she felt today would only get worse as the time went on and she grew more attached to him. No matter how she fought it, it was likely already too late, she now realized. There was silence from him, for a long time. "How would I go about that? I did just tell you twice, it's not all I want from you. What if I said, I didn't want to have a baby for 5 or 10 years yet?" she asked him, felt Kyra's instant annoyance, didn't like that idea at all, waiting for a pup of her own. "If that's what you want, Lucinda, that's fine with me." Her eyes moved back to him. He was leaning on the counter watching her. He didn't look annoyed or even bothered by her statement. It appeared to her that, what he'd said, was the truth. She returned to making her hot chocolate. "In truth, I wasn't planning on an heir till at least 35. Does that help?" "I don't know," she sighed and walked away with her drink. Sat cross-legged on the lounge to drink it. Nick dropped himself right down next to her. "I have no intention of rejecting you. I've told you this before." "I know," she acknowledged. "Why ask now?" he prompted her. Lucinda sighed. She'd started this conversation and he likely wasn't going to just let it go either. "I overheard 2 women talking about you today. They said they felt sorry for me, wondered if I knew what you really wanted." Ah, he said simply, that would be the Frost family legacy, they're talking about, I suppose. I'm not like my father or brothers, Lucinda. What Frost family legacy? The rest of the audiobook will be continued in the next episode. Join us on Patreon for early access or more great audiobooks. A link is provided in the video description.